distinguished members of the Academy of Science, Mr. President, Professor Meunier, many thanks for the honor to be here. And it's indeed a great honor to be here in the cupola of this prestigious academy, and together with my friends, Professor Jean-Marie Lane, Jean-Pierre Sauvage, and Fraser Stoddart. As we are running 15 minutes late, I have to speed up a lot, and I will tell you how we speed up our motors. But I will talk about the art of building small, from molecular switches to molecular motors, but I like to go back in time a little bit before I start my scientific story. And that is slightly over 100 years ago, when the Wright brothers were flying for the first time. And nobody had predicted that 100 years later in Toulouse, they would build the Airbus. And although people have admired the flying of the bird, we all realize this is a machine with 3 million components, which is manufactured there by your countrymen, is not a natural system. It's synthetically. It's entirely made by man, and it has not the flying principles of a bird. If we would be flying with our wings flapping, we would not go with an Airbus with several hundred people with 900 kilometers an hour over the world, through the air. But of course, realize also that after 100 years, we are not able to build a single pigeon, not a cell of a pigeon, not even one part of the cell of the pigeon. So we should be a bit humble. But we are able as chemists to build cables and cars, drugs and dyes, our smartphones, all the materials that we use in daily life that keeps us going. But if you realize also that most of these materials are quite static, we are not as good as nature in building the kind of tiny machines that my colleagues were talking about. When you look at your body and your cells, you have these rotary motors that pump things in and out of the cell and that generate the fuel, the ATP. You have these bio-nanomotors that make the things move on your filaments in the cell, transporters. You have this fantastic ribosome machine, which is a complex machine that makes the proteins. You have the bacterial flagella motor and the optical switching in your eye, which is probably the most fantastic switching device that you can think of. Most of the important processes in the cells in our body and biology are all powered by molecular motors and by these dynamic devices. So in the last couple of decades, we have slowly learned how to make molecular motors, switches, machines, and dynamic functions. And I will show you a few examples like my colleagues did. And I think this is a new era in material science, in chemistry, and molecular design. But like the Wright brothers, you should realize that we are still quite primitive. And so there is another important aspect when you think of the macro world and the nano world. When you look at your car manufacturing plant, like at the Peugeot manufacturing, you have these beautiful robots there, 2 meters in size, that do a great job manufacturing the cars or building these cars. But then in your body you have this natural robot, the ribosome, which is 24 nanometers in size, really tiny, but it's a way more complex machine, I would argue. But there is a distinct effect of length scales. It's a different world at the nano scale. You have the hard materials that we know from the macro world, and you have the soft materials in your body. The effect of length scale also means that we work at low Reynolds numbers and we have Brownian motion. So controlling motion is not so much about getting motion, but how to control motion, because it's quite a storm there at the molecular world. Of course, at the nanoscale, weight, gravity, and so don't play much of a role. Molecules don't weigh that much. You know what a car weighs. But of course, interactions, that Professor Lane was talking about, that makes a big difference. Interactions between molecules. So when we talk about switches, we think maybe about the switch in your eye. The fact that I can see you and you can see me is due to a very elementary chemical process, the photochemical isomerization around a carbon-carbon double bond. Every student learns this in his first year undergraduate class. And this is a switch because it goes back and forth. If it was not a switch, we would see each other only once and then it would be over. Of course, this switching process triggers a signal to our brain, and that is why we can see. And this is how we started several years ago to see if we can do optical information storage at the molecular scale. And you might ask, why do you not use then the molecule from your eye? But of course, when you take it out of the protein environment, it's not very stable. You cannot make a compact disc or the device. So we designed these molecules that you see here, which are helical structures, M for minus and P for plus, left and right. And you might wonder, why did they make these molecules chiral, two mirror images? And the reason was that we wanted to switch between a left-handed and a right-handed form, because that allowed us to distinguish what was the 0 and what was the 1 without destroying the information. Because we could switch with wavelengths of light, store information, but then we could retrieve the information at wavelengths far out of the switching regime, taking advantage of this beautiful chiral property of the molecule, left and right. And so indeed we could make a compact disc type structures, store information, and this has been the start of our program. Now you can go further and think about what can you do with this when you have dynamic molecular systems. And as Professor Stoddart already mentioned, one of the big challenges is to move things out of equilibrium. I don't know if you realize your body, we are out of equilibrium. If we would be in equilibrium, we all would be dead. There is a metabolism, of course, that pushes us out of equilibrium. So when we look at the cell, there is these processes of self-assembly that Professor Lane was mentioning, the trigger and response functions like in your eye, and of course all these motor functions. So I will talk a little bit about responsive materials, smart drugs, and then about motors. And so let me start with self-assembly. So we thought if we build these kind of switching functions into materials that can self-assemble, for instance, in water, and you see an example here that we designed in the laboratories, like an amphiphile. An amphiphile is typically a component that you find in soaps, and you see here a component which has a central aromatic part that is a switching function. You have a hydrophilic and a hydrophobic part, a part that loves water and a part that doesn't like water. And when you put this in water, you get these beautiful nanotubes by self-assembly. They are micrometer long. They are exactly 28 nanometers in diameter. Every tube is equal. And you can even put a cap on it, a vesicle, and you probably never have seen such a small reaction tube by a chemist anywhere in the world. This is a nanometer dimension reaction tube. We can put things in, we can take things out. They are extremely stable and robust. You can take this cap off, you can put it on again, you can put a load in there. This is because we designed this molecule specifically. But we also built in a switch. And so when we hit it with light, and you see one of the tubes here, you see it starts moving. And you see two of these tubes actually here. And by using fluorescent techniques, we can follow exactly, as you can see, we can induce the motion of the tubes. They bend, they curl, they deform in a different shape. And we can tune this property very precisely. So they react to an external signal because we build in this dynamic function at the nanoscale. And I don't touch it. I only switch on the lamp or switch off the lamp. So why are these useful? Because we build these kind of systems, for instance, to put a load in it, a pharmaceutical, and then use them maybe for delivering a drug into your body at a precisely controlled spot. Coming to delivery, we also thought, can we make a nanopore or a nanovalve? And for that, we took the mechanosensitive channel protein complex from the coli bacteria in your body. And you see it here. You see here a top view and a side view. And it's like a diaphragma in a camera. It can open suddenly to prevent the to prevent the cell from bursting. It's a kind of a pressure valve for the safety cooker. And so we thought, what happens if we build in a light switch? Can we then open and close this nanopore of 3 to 4 nanometer on demand? And that opens up a lot of opportunities. So what we did is we modified the genome so that we could express proteins to build in, to have the ability to build in a light switch. And you see here a spiral pyrene function. And with light, we can switch this function in the protein complex at very specific positions in the protein complex. And the idea was, as you can see with this switch, we introduce charges, and these charges repel each other, and that makes that this pore opens. And then when we put it into the wall of an artificial cell, like a big vesicle, and we load this vesicle with a dye, we can put a lamp to it, we illuminate, it opens the pore at the nanoscale, and material flows out. Once again, this is a complex self-assembled system with a designed function, a dynamic function at the nanoscale. And only due to the light signal, we can open it, we can trigger it. And we can close it again. So why do we do this? Once again, the ultimate goal, of course, is to make capsules that can go into the body and deliver a drug when it's hit by a signal from the outside, precisely on the spot. Or you have a material, like a plastic, and you have a scratch. Light hits the scratch, the tiny capsules open the pore, a monomer flows out, and the material repairs itself. That's the dream. You can go a step further. We thought about smart drugs to do more precision therapy. So normally when you take a pill, the pill will distribute to your body and it might act at the spot where it should act, but it might also act at many other places. And the whole idea is, can we build in a light switch in a drug and get high precision therapeutic action? And we focus on two really important problems. One is bacterial resistance. You all read about it. Hospital departments that have to close because of bacterial resistance, the overuse of antibiotics, and cancer treatment. And so the idea was to take an antibiotic, build in a light switch, and here you see an example of ciprofloxacin, which is a broad-spectrum antibiotic that's used in the clinic. We build in a light switch, the so-called azobenzene. We can switch with light on and off. We can pattern bacterial growth, as you can see there, by using a mask technique. Where it's illuminated, bacteria don't grow. Where we have not illuminated, the bacteria grow happy. But the most important thing here is that we can switch the activity off simply thermally. So after 6 hours, after 12 hours, after 24 hours, precisely how we design the molecules, the antibiotic activity is off. So now you can imagine where we are heading for. When you have an infection, a local infection, you take your antibiotic, it is not active, it doesn't harm your bacteria in your body, but you eliminate with a lamp, and you will only activate it on the spot, there where the infection is. And after 12 hours, it automatically switches off. When it comes in the environment, there's no antibiotic effect anymore, no bacterial resistance buildup. That's a bit of a dream. We are not that far yet. We have proven it in the laboratories. We are working now with clinicians to see if we can get a step further. The most important challenge at this moment is to get it switchable with visible or near infrared light, because you all know UV light is dangerous, that we used initially, but infrared light has a high penetration depth in tissue, and we might be able to use it in the clinic. We used it also for anti-tumor compounds, like bortezomib, for instance. You see here an anti-tumor compound. We all know the problems with chemotherapeutic agents. Yeah, your hair drops off, you get all these nasty side effects. The dream is that you have a chemotherapeutic agent that you can switch on the spot. For instance, if you can detect by these new fantastic imaging techniques the tiny tumors, and then write more or less the activity of your chemotherapeutic agent. That is a bit of a dream. Of course, we have also to be realistic. It is a long distance going from the laboratory to the clinic. So with these switching functions, we hope to make smart pharmaceuticals, but there are lots of other possibilities to interfere with biological functions. So I showed you how we can use switches to control self-assembly, maybe doing information storage, using them to make nanovalves, and maybe smart drugs in the future. But let me move on to motors. A molecular motor, and we have been focusing on rotary motors. And the timeline, and I will very briefly be here, I started with this actually in 1977 when I was a PhD student. We make molecules that we forget for a while, and then when I started my academic career and I built these switches for information storage, I picked up these molecules again, and you see here the timeline, how we go to all the way to our motors. So it's a long journey of more than 30 years. Now, when you compare an electromotor with the ATPase motor, we all know it's rotary motion. And why is it rotating? Because you fuel it, either with electricity, in our case with light, or with a chemical, ATPase motor. And when you look at the ATPase motor in your body, this is a rotary motor. It's a couple of nanometers in size. It produces ATP. It rotates, it spins. You also realize it spins in one direction. That's crucial for a rotary motor, of course. Think of your car. If you have a rotary motor in your car, the motor in your car, and it has equal probability going backward and forward, you wouldn't get anywhere. This motor, I don't know if you realize, this tiny nano motor produces 30 kilograms of ATP in your body every 24 hours. 30 kilograms, ladies and gentlemen. Think about that. That's a lot. Of course, it's also hydrolyzed and consumed again because it's the fuel in our body. Of course, it's not one motor, it's millions of these motors that work together. This is the nano world. So, how to control rotary motion in the nano world and how to control left or right? That is the fundamental questions that we were addressing. And so, controlling left and right goes back to stereochemistry, and Jacobus van 't Hoff and Professor Lebel. I couldn't find a picture of Lebel. I'm sorry for my French colleagues here. I have to apologize. But they were the fathers of stereochemistry, of course. And then Professor Eschenmoser said, mirror image symmetry is a signature of life. It's so crucial, left and right, in the essential molecules in our body. And this is also crucial for the rotary motor, distinguishing between left and right. Professor Winberg was my PhD supervisor. He was a stereochemist, and I owe a lot to him, and I want to give credit here to him as well. So we designed the world's smallest and first rotary motor. It's a power stroke motor because it's powered by light. Why do we call it a motor? Because it consumes energy, the light. It has directional movement, and it is a repetitive process. You can rotate it many times. It's about 1 nanometer, slightly less than 1 nanometer in size. And how does it rotate? When you hit it with light, it goes through 4 stages of a rotary motion. And I don't have time to go through all these steps, but the important steps are the photochemical isomerization, like in your eye, coupled to a thermal isomerization. So you have a 4-step rotary cycle, which gives a 360-degree rotation in one direction, either clockwise or counterclockwise. If you have the left-hand form of the molecule, it goes counterclockwise. If you have the right-handed form of the molecule, it goes clockwise. Now, you might wonder, we designed in the past decade maybe 50 different motors. The original motor, you might wonder, how fast was it? 1 rotation per hour. That's not very useful. You cannot build a car with a motor that goes only once an hour. But now in the meantime, we have adapted the designs, and we have now motors that rotate 10 million rotations per second. So what can you do with it? You can put them on surfaces to make active surfaces. I will show you an example. You can put them in mesoscopic materials like liquid crystals. You can put them to polymers to make dynamic polymers, materials, and you can move things at the single molecule level. And I will show you that as well. So I want to show you a few illustrations how you can use this motion. So here, what you see here is a liquid crystal material. And what you actually see here is a glass rod of 28 micrometer swimming on top of the liquid crystal material. So when you take away the glass plate from your laptop or your smartphone, you find the soft material and the liquid crystal layer. Don't do it because you destroy your laptop or your smartphone. But there are these waves, the soft material. The motor is in there. It's only 1 nanometer. You don't see it. We put on an object of micrometer size, 10,000 times the size. You hit it with light. I don't touch it. It rotates because the motor spins. The liquid crystal material changes its organization. The surface changes. And you see it spinning. And it spins clockwise, because this is dictated by the motor. We can also spin it counterclockwise. You see also the color change. So we can make color pixels in the display in this way as well. You can put it on surfaces, so we make these motors with legs, attached it by self-assembly techniques on surfaces, and then the motors spin all in the same direction. A monolayer of motors, propellers, all spinning in the same direction, if you illuminate, because it needs energy, of course. And so we built, and this is a Dutch design. I'm from the Netherlands. We built a nano windmill park powered by light. And you see the design here. The difference in size is about 1 billion between the real windmills that our ancestors built 500 years ago and what we built. But our ancestors were a bit smarter because they could put it on a dike and pump water from our lowlands. Les Pays-Bas. So we try now to build them also on dikes and to do useful tasks with it. For instance, making responsive surfaces. Then I was challenged when we had a discussion with the students, can we go from rotation to translation like in a real car? And my students were a little bit jealous of the engineering schools that always build these beautiful cars, for instance, these solar-powered cars, and they can go to Australia to this contest. And so I challenged my students and I said, look, we can build a nano car, maybe a 4-wheel drive. And you see the difference in size, 2 meters and 2 nanometers. And I told them, you know, when you succeed, you can go to a conference in Australia. The first generation students didn't succeed because it took us 7 years, you know, before we completed it. So here is the nano car. It's a 4-wheel drive. You see 4 of these motor structures that form the wheels. And we pulse it, we excite the molecule with an STM tip, scanning tunneling microscopy. And the real question, I mean, it was not, of course, that we wanted to build a car. That was not the scientific challenge. The scientific challenge was how to convert rotary motion into translational motion on the surface at a single molecule level. And here you see the car moving over the surface. So you might realize maybe that the motors in your body, they move different than the motors in your car. So our car probably moves more like it's a molecular system, like the molecules in your muscles or in your filaments in your body, you know, where they do the transporting, etc. So they are more like a stepping motion. So this is more realistic, how you see how they move over the surface. So let me finish with my last example, because you might ask, will this ever work, for instance, in your body? And I was challenged to design something that maybe could go ultimately through your blood veins. So what we thought a little bit about the fuel that we need then, and as there is a lot of glucose in your body, we thought, can we make a submarine built on carbon nanotubes? And I'm sure many of you have heard about carbon nanotubes. We put two enzymes there, glucose oxidase and catalase. We bind them to these nanotubes, and you see these nanotubes in the left, right corner. So we built this kind of submarines, and in the right corner there, you see the movie of a small aggregate of these nanotubes in water, and there is only glucose there. I don't touch it. The glucose is the fuel, and the system moves autonomously as long as there is glucose as a fuel. Now, this does look very, very well controlled. We still have to learn how to go from A to B to control it. But we have made the first primitive steps. So are we going to enter a fantastic voyage, like Asimov predicted? Are we going to have in the future this kind of submarines that are injected by a surgeon in your blood veins to go to search for a defect cell? Or like a machine or a robot deliver a drug? I don't know. It's science or science fiction. I would predict that 30, 40 years from now, with the help of the younger generation here, we might be able to do this. The first steps have been made. I'm not so good in prediction, so I would say the best way to predict the future is to invent it, and this is what scientists do. So to conclude, the art of building small is about programming molecules, as Jean-Marie said, responsive and adaptive functions, that's what we were talking about, and about motors and motion, and ultimately make more complex dynamic systems. And then the perspectives are information systems, maybe, responsive materials, smart surfaces, I showed you some example, self-healing materials, it was mentioned, or delivery of drugs, or precision therapeutics, adaptive catalysts, or roving sensors, or nanoscale energy converters, or soft robotics. There's a lot out there. This is only the first small primitive steps. But the future is bright, and I'm particularly looking at the young stars in this audience. So let me thank my young stars that are in my team, a multicultural team of 14 different nations that work in my laboratories on these projects. I want to thank the granting organizations, all the generations of students, of course, and the colleagues that I cooperate with, and the molecular machine community, of course, my family for the strong support, but most of all, my students that did all the hard work and the creativity in the laboratories. And for the students, I want to finish also with a message by Leonardo da Vinci. Where nature finishes producing its own species, man begins, with the help of nature, to create an infinity of species. And for the young people, imagine the unimaginable. Thank you so much.